In 1924, geologists found seashells embedded in rocks at 8,848 meters of altitude. They were at the summit of Everest, creatures that only live at the bottom of the ocean, frozen in stone, at the highest point on the planet. The official explanation took decades to formulate, but there's another explanation that nobody wants to consider. And it wasn't just Everest. In the Andes, at more than 4,000 meters of altitude, fossils of marine creatures appeared embedded in the rock. Perfectly preserved ammonites, brachiopods with their shells intact, trilobites with compound eyes still visible under the microscope. In the Swiss Alps, the same thing. 19th century geologists were baffled to find impressions of fish and mollusks at heights where only eagles and snow should exist. In the Rocky Mountains of North America, identical pattern. In the Himalayas, in the Pyrenees, in the Zagros Mountains of Iran, in the mountains of Ethiopia, 6 continents, same phenomenon. Creatures that were born, lived and died at the bottom of the ocean, now frozen in stone kilometers above sea level. The conventional explanation says that tectonic plates gradually elevated the seafloor over millions of years. Slow process, imperceptible, uniform. The ancient Tethys Ocean, geologists say, covered the region where the Himalayas rise today. When India collided with Asia 50 million years ago, the seafloor was pushed upward, centimeter by centimeter, millennium after millennium, until reaching heights where oxygen is scarce and temperatures stay below zero permanently. But when you examine the fossils closely, something doesn't fit with that gradual narrative. These creatures show no signs of prolonged decomposition. There are no marks from scavengers that normally devour carcasses on the seafloor. There's no extended erosion before burial. There are no signs of the processes that occur when an organism dies and spends weeks or months exposed before being covered by sediments. They were buried rapidly, so fast that their most delicate structures remained perfectly preserved. Echinoderm spines that disarticulate hours after death remain connected. Jellyfish tentacles that dissolve in days were imprinted in the rock. Internal structures of mollusks that collapse quickly under normal decomposition remain intact. A fossilized nautilus found in the Himalayas had its internal chambers perfectly preserved. The siphuncle, that delicate tube connecting the chambers that allows the animal to control its buoyancy, was visible. Structures so fragile they disintegrate within days after death, if not buried immediately. But there it was, perfect, as if it had been sealed in a matter of hours, not millennia. In 1984, Chinese paleontologists discovered fish fossils in Tibet at 5,000 meters of altitude. The fish were in life position, not crushed, not disarticulated, frozen in the act of swimming. The preservation was so extraordinary that researchers could identify the contents of their stomachs. They had eaten shortly before dying. Death was instantaneous. Burial was immediate. This is just the beginning. There's a geological phenomenon that textbooks mention briefly and then move past. They're called polystrates. They're fossils, usually tree trunks, that vertically cross multiple layers of rock. Layers that, according to conventional chronology, took millions of years to be deposited. Think about what this implies. A tree dies and remains standing. The first layer of sediment partially covers it, maybe half a meter of its base. According to the gradual deposition model, 100,000 years pass. Another layer covers it a bit more. Another 200,000 years pass. Another layer. And so on, layer after layer, millennium after millennium, until the entire trunk is buried under meters of stratified rock. The problem is obvious to anyone who has seen wood exposed to the elements. Wood doesn't last millions of years. It doesn't even last thousands. Under normal conditions, exposed to air, water, fungi and bacteria, a tree trunk completely disappears in less than 100 years. Sometimes in decades. Cellulose decomposes, lignin degrades, insects bore through it, fungi devour it. What was once a majestic tree becomes dust scattered by the wind. But these fossilized trunks cross layers that supposedly represent millions of years of slow and gradual deposition. They're whole, vertical, without signs of gradual decay in the upper sections that would have been exposed during those supposed geological ages. The only logical explanation is that all those layers were deposited rapidly, not in millions of years, not in thousands, possibly in days, perhaps in hours. The tree died, was completely buried by suspended sediments, and the fossilization process began before decomposition could act. In Joggins, Nova Scotia, there's a coastal cliff 400 meters long where more than 100 polystrates have been documented, trunks up to 6 meters tall, crossing multiple strata of sandstone, shite and coal layers. The site is so significant that it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008. But on the informational signs for tourists, the enigma of the polystrates is barely mentioned. In Yorkshire, England, the cliffs near Whitby reveal the same phenomenon, fossilized trunks crossing Jurassic period strata. In the coal basin of Pennsylvania, United States, 19th century miners constantly documented polystrates while excavating coal. In Australia, in the Sydney Basin, researchers found trunks over 10 meters tall crossing what supposedly represented millions of years of geological history. In France, Germany, Spain, South Africa, China. Every time geologists dig deep, every time mining exposes ancient strata, every time erosion reveals cross-sections of the geological column, more polystrates appear. And here comes the detail that nobody explains satisfactorily. Inside some of these fossilized trunks, scientists found remains of land animals. In Joggins, inside hollow lycopod stumps, skeletons of amphibians and primitive reptiles appeared. Creatures that clearly sought refuge inside the hollow trunk, perhaps while the water was rising. Perhaps while the world they knew was disappearing beneath waves of mud and sediment, and they were buried along with it, rapidly, catastrophically. But polystrates are just one anomaly among many. There's another that crosses entire continents and defies any explanation based on slow and gradual processes. They're called transcontinental sedimentary layers. They're rock strata that maintain almost identical composition across thousands of kilometers. Same thickness, same type of sediment, same deposition sequence, same index fossils. As if someone had spread a sheet of mud over half the planet simultaneously. The Tapetes Formation, for example, it's a layer of sandstone that extends from the Grand Canyon in Arizona across the entire North American continent. More than 5,000 kilometers of the same rock, deposited in the same sequence, with the same grain pattern, with the same internal sedimentary structures. Geologists who study it in detail admit something remarkable in their technical publications. The only way to create a layer this uniform over such enormous distances is with massive sediment transport in water moving at catastrophic speeds. High-energy currents dragging sand and depositing it in uniform layers over continental areas. Not normal rain, not ordinary rivers, not common coastal processes. Catastrophe. In Europe, the chalk formation that crosses from the White Cliffs of Dover in England to the Caspian Sea presents the same mystery. More than 4,000 kilometers of almost identical rock. The chalk is composed mainly of coccolithophores, microscopic organisms with calcareous shells. Billions of these organisms died, and their remains were deposited in uniform layers that today form cliffs on 3 continents. The cliffs of Dover and the cliffs of the Crimean Peninsula are made of the same material, same chemical composition, same microscopic structure, same microfossils, oceans apart, nations separated by thousands of kilometers of water and land. But the same event left the same mark. The Redwall limestone formation in the Grand Canyon has direct equivalents in North Africa. When you compare samples from Arizona with samples from the Sahara, the similarity is astonishing. Same mineralogical composition, same crystalline texture, same fossils of crinoids and brachiopods embedded within. What kind of event deposits identical sediments across continents separated by entire oceans? The gradualist model proposes coincidences, similar conditions that supposedly occurred in different places during the same millions of years. But the statistical probabilities that identical conditions would be maintained simultaneously in such distant places for such prolonged periods, producing such uniform results, are astronomically low. The catastrophist model has a much simpler answer. A global event. Water covering everything. Sediments being transported massively by oceanic currents of planetary scale. Simultaneous deposition in a matter of days or weeks over entire continents. Not millions of years of improbable coincidences. A catastrophe of planetary scale that rewrote the Earth's surface all at once. And then we come to the most uncomfortable anomaly of all, for the gradual model of the history of life. They call it the Cambrian explosion. Approximately 540 million years ago, according to conventional chronology, something extraordinary happened in the fossil record. Suddenly, without visible gradual transition, without the intermediate forms that theory predicts, almost all the major body plans of animals that exist today appeared. Arthropods with perfectly functional compound eyes, calcite lenses that focused light with optical precision that modern engineers can barely replicate, mollusks with complex spiral shells, structures that require sophisticated genetic information to develop, chordates with spinal columns, notochords, and centralized nervous systems, echinoderms with intricate radial symmetries and water vascular systems unique in the animal kingdom, all appearing at once in a geological blink. Paleontologists expected to find a gradual evolutionary tree when they dug into increasingly older rocks. Simple forms at the base, complexity slowly increasing upward, clear transitions from one type of organism to another. Instead, they found an explosion, massive diversity appearing simultaneously in the fossil record, more than 20 different animal phyla emerging in a period that, even according to the most generous conventional chronology, represents less than 1% of the history of life on Earth. Darwin himself recognized the problem. In The Origin of Species, published in 1859, he wrote that the sudden appearance of entire groups of species in the oldest fossiliferous strata was a case that, in the present state of our knowledge, is inexplicable, and that may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views here entertained. He hoped that future discoveries would fill the gaps, that they would find the transitional forms, that the fossil record would eventually show the graduality that his theory required. 160 years later, the problem has not only not been solved, it has intensified. Many more Cambrian fossils have been found. Extraordinary sites like Burgess Shale in Canada, Chengjiang in China, Sirius Passet in Greenland. Dating techniques have been refined. Imaging methods have been developed that allow seeing previously invisible details, but the explosion is still there, sudden, without clear transition, as if complex life had appeared all at once, fully formed, ready to function. And here's a fascinating detail that few consider. Cambrian fossils are extraordinarily well preserved. Soft-bodied creatures, organisms without shells or skeletons that normally decompose in hours or days after death, were fossilized with visible internal details. Digestive organs, circulatory systems, neural structures, eyes with preserved lenses, delicate appendages with microscopic bristles and spines. In Xinjiang, paleontologists found a Fuxian Huia fossil with the brain preserved. Neural tissue 520 million years old, fossilized with enough detail to study its structure. Under normal conditions, brain tissue liquefies hours after death. This only happens with catastrophic and rapid burial, instant entombment under sediments that exclude oxygen and bacteria before decomposition can act, not with slow and gradual deposition over millions of years. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence of all isn't in ancient mountains or in Cambrian rock layers. It's underwater, in a sea that holds secrets of a flood documented by modern science, the Black Sea. In 1997, two marine geologists from Columbia University, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, published a study that shook the scientific community. Using high-resolution sonar, seismic profiles of the seafloor, and sediment samples extracted with deep drilling technology, they documented evidence of a catastrophic flood approximately 7,500 years ago. According to their findings, the Black Sea had been an isolated freshwater lake, located hundreds of meters below the level of the Mediterranean. A natural barrier in the Bosphorus Strait kept both bodies of water separate. The lake had its own freshwater fauna, its own shorelines. Human communities settled on its shores. Then something broke the barrier, perhaps gradual erosion, perhaps an earthquake, perhaps simply the accumulated weight of the Mediterranean water finally breaking through the natural dam. The exact mechanism is still debated. What isn't debated is what followed. Salt water from the Mediterranean burst through with force equivalent to 200 times the flow of Niagara Falls. A continuous torrent, day and night, week after week. Each day, approximately 60 cubic kilometers of water entered. The lake level rose 15 centimeters daily. Shorelines retreated meters each day. In less than 2 years, 150,000 square kilometers of habitable land were submerged, an area equivalent to all of modern Greece. Underwater, the sonar revealed what the water had buried. Ancient shorelines, clearly visible hundreds of meters below the current surface, preserved beaches with fossilized wave patterns, intact sand dunes, riverbeds that once flowed into the lake and now end abruptly under the saltwater. And something else, rectangular structures, right angles that nature doesn't produce, buildings that only human hands could have constructed. In the year 2000, explorer Robert Ballard, the same oceanographer who found the remains of the Titanic in 1985, descended with deep-water submersibles into the Black Sea. He wanted to see with his own eyes what the sonar had suggested. At 400 meters deep, in almost total darkness, the submersible's lights illuminated something that left the team speechless. Remains of human dwellings, stone foundations, wooden posts still vertical after millennia underwater, pottery fragments, stone tools, unmistakable evidence of a civilization that lived, prospered, and was buried under waters that previously didn't exist. Carbon-14 dating of the preserved wood gave consistent results, approximately 7,000 years old, right in the time range that many scholars calculate for events described in ancient texts. Right when multiple civilizations of the Near East were beginning to record memories of a catastrophic flood. And there's something else that makes the Black Sea unique as a time capsule. Below a certain depth, approximately 150 meters, the Black Sea water completely lacks oxygen. It's anoxic. This condition developed after the flood, when the denser salt water from the Mediterranean settled at the bottom and became isolated from surface circulation. Without oxygen, aerobic bacteria cannot survive. Without aerobic bacteria, organic matter doesn't decompose normally. Ships that sank thousands of years ago remain intact on the bottom. The wood doesn't rot. The ropes don't fall apart. Leather retains its texture. Byzantine merchant ships, Roman galleys, Greek vessels, all preserved as the day they sank, waiting in the anoxic darkness. It's a natural museum of catastrophe preserved underwater, an archive of lost civilization that marine geology is just beginning to explore. But this is just a regional event, skeptics argue. A local flood, however dramatic, doesn't prove a global flood. A cataclysm in the Black Sea doesn't mean the entire world was underwater. Correct. An isolated piece of evidence proves nothing. But when you add all the evidence together, when you connect the dots scattered across 6 continents and all the oceans, the pattern becomes extraordinarily difficult to ignore. Marine fossils on mountain peaks on every inhabited continent. Polystrates crossing layers supposedly millions of years old without showing decomposition. Transcontinental sedimentary layers maintaining identical composition across entire oceans. Catastrophic preservation of soft-bodied creatures that should have decomposed in hours. Layers that modern events demonstrate can form instantaneously. Civilizations submerged under seas that were once inhabited valleys. And there's something else that transcends geology. More than 270 ancient cultures scattered across all continents without known contact between them, preserved accounts of a global flood. Mesopotamia has Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim. Greece has Deucalion and Pyrrha. India has Manu and the divine fish. China has Nua repairing the sky after the deluge. The Aztecs have Coxcox surviving in a hollow log. The Hawaiians have Nu building a great boat. Australian Aborigines speak of the rainbow serpent and the waters that covered the land. 270 versions of the same event. Cultures that didn't share language, that didn't trade with each other, that developed their civilizations completely independently, all telling variations of the same story. Anthropologists call it shared cultural memory. They attribute it to local floods that each culture independently experienced and then exaggerated over time. But the consistency of the details is remarkable. A righteous man warned, animals saved, water covering everything, survival in a vessel, birds sent to find land, a new beginning after the cataclysm, too much coincidence to be coincidence. And here is where modern science faces a philosophical dilemma that few openly admit. The guiding principle of modern geology for almost 2 centuries is called uniformitarianism. It was formulated by Scottish geologist Charles Lyell in his work Principles of Geology, published between 1830 and 1833. Uniformitarianism establishes that the geological processes we observe acting today, slow erosion by water and wind, gradual deposition of sediments, imperceptible tectonic movement of centimeters per year, are the same processes that acted in the past at the same speeds, producing the same results. The present is the key to the past. Slow, uniform, gradual processes acting over vast periods of time, millions and billions of years of imperceptible change accumulating to produce the landscapes and formations we see today. There's no need for catastrophes. There's no room for sudden events of global scale. Change is always gradual, always slow, always measurable by analogy with what we see happening right now. This principle was explicitly designed to replace an earlier view of Earth's history, a view that included supernatural catastrophes, a view that took the flood account seriously. Lyell admitted it in private letters to his colleagues. He wanted, in his own words, to free the science from Moses. The goal was never purely scientific, based solely on observed evidence. It was philosophical. It was to establish an interpretive framework that would make supernatural explanations unnecessary. And for 180 years, uniformitarianism completely dominated geology. Any evidence of catastrophe was reinterpreted to fit the gradual model. Any anomaly was minimized, ignored, or filed away as a problem to be solved in the future. The gradualist paradigm became unquestionable dogma. But in the last decades of the 20th century, something began to change within the geological community itself. Mainstream geologists, researchers published in prestigious journals, scientists with chairs at respected universities, began to accept what they now call neo-catastrophism. They admit that catastrophic events played a much more significant role in geological history than Lyell would ever have accepted. asteroid impacts that extinguished dinosaurs, megafloods that carved entire landscapes in days, supervolcanic eruptions that altered the global climate, tsunamis that deposited sediments hundreds of kilometers inland. Science is rediscovering catastrophe. It's admitting that change isn't always gradual, that sometimes the planet experiences events of unimaginable violence that rewrite entire geographies in very brief periods of time. But there's one specific catastrophe that remains outside the boundaries of acceptable scientific discourse: a global flood. Mentioning it in academic circles is risking credibility and reputation. Suggesting that geological evidence might support it is inviting professional ostracism. Associating it with the biblical account of Genesis is practically unthinkable in formal scientific contexts, and yet the evidence keeps accumulating. In every new site of extraordinarily preserved fossils, in every new transcontinental layer mapped, in every new polystrate documented, in every new submerged civilization discovered under seas that were once dry land. In 2004, geologists studying the Sumatra earthquake and the Indian Ocean mega tsunami observed something that made them reconsider basic assumptions. In a matter of hours, the tsunami deposited layers of sediment that, if found in the fossil record without context, would have been dated as thousands of years of gradual deposition, grain gradations from coarse to fine, multiple laminations, hydraulic sorting patterns. All the sedimentary structures that textbooks say require long periods of time, forming in hours before the measuring instruments. In 2011, Japanese researchers studying the effects of the Tohoku tsunami documented instantaneous formation of deposits that manuals assure take centuries or millennia to develop. They recorded video of stratified layers forming in real time. Nature was demonstrating with filmed evidence that the gradualist paradigm had fundamental cracks. But the most dramatic example, the one that truly changed what geologists thought they knew about strata formation, had occurred 3 decades earlier on a volcano in the northwestern United States. May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens, Washington State. At 8:32 in the morning local time, after 2 months of increasing seismic activity and small steam eruptions, the volcano exploded. It wasn't the largest volcanic eruption in history. It wasn't even the largest of the 20th century. Pinatubo in 1991 would release more material. Historical eruptions like Tambora in 1815 had been orders of magnitude greater. But Mount St. Helens was the most studied, documented and analyzed volcanic eruption in the history of science. Hundreds of scientists from multiple disciplines observed it in real time. Seismographs recorded every tremor. Satellites photographed every phase. Research teams arrived while the dust was still settling. What they witnessed and documented defied assumptions that had been taught as facts for generations. In 9 hours, not in millions of years, the volcano deposited layers of ash, pumice, and volcanic sediment up to 180 meters thick in some areas. Finely laminated layers with clearly visible grain gradations, with internal structures that any 19th century geologist would have dated as entire geological ages. But the scientists of 1980 had witnessed their formation. They had photographs with date and time. They had minute-by-minute measurements. They knew with absolute certainty that those ancient-looking layers were only hours old. 2 years later, in March 1982, a minor eruption of the volcano melted the snow accumulated in the crater. The resulting water mixed with ash and volcanic debris, forming a massive mudflow that descended the slopes at terrifying speeds. This flow, technically called a lahar, did something extraordinary. It carved canyons in the hardened ash from the main eruption. In a single day, what local geologists began calling the Little Grand Canyon of Mount St. Helens was formed. 40 meters deep, stratified walls showing multiple layers, sinuous curves following the water flow pattern, terraces at different levels, a miniature but geologically perfect replica of the Grand Canyon of Arizona. The Grand Canyon, according to dominant conventional geology, took between 5 and 6 million years to form. Gradual erosion by the Colorado River, centimeter by centimeter, millennium after millennium, slowly excavating through layers of rock representing billions of years of Earth history. But here was its little brother, formed in hours, by catastrophic flow of water and mud, photographically documented, instrumentally measured, undeniable. The geologists who studied Mount St. Helens in the following years had to mentally rewrite the textbooks they had memorized in university. Not publicly, not in the textbooks that reach high schools, not in popular science documentaries, but in the technical articles published in specialized journals, in geology conferences where only other specialists attended, in private conversations between colleagues. The admission was there, implicit or explicit. Catastrophe can do in hours what uniformitarianism assured took millennia. Slow and gradual processes aren't the only explanation. Sometimes, perhaps more frequently than anyone wanted to admit, geological change occurs suddenly, violently, catastrophically. And if a moderate-sized volcanic eruption can do that, if a regional tsunami can instantly deposit layers that look millennia old, if an earthquake can reorganize strata in minutes in ways that supposedly took ages, then a truly global catastrophe, an event of planetary scale involving quantities of water that defy imagination, would completely rewrite the geological record. It would cover everything. It would redeposit everything. It would fossilize everything, rapidly, catastrophically, simultaneously on every continent, and it would leave exactly the type of evidence we find scattered across the entire planet. Perfectly preserved marine fossils at the summit of Everest, polystrates crossing layers supposedly millions of years old without signs of decomposition. Identical transcontinental sediments on 6 continents separated by oceans. Catastrophic preservation of soft-bodied creatures that should have decomposed in hours. Layers that modern events demonstrate can form instantaneously. Civilizations submerged under seas that were once inhabited valleys. The evidence of the flood isn't hidden in secret archives or in museums closed to the public. It's in every natural history museum in the world, in the display cases of marine fossils found in mountains. It's in every highway cut that exposes strata to the view of any passing driver. It's in every marine fossil that a hiker finds thousands of meters above sea level, far from any ocean. It's in every fossilized trunk that crosses layers that supposedly took geological ages to form. It's in the shells embedded in the limestone that climbers touch with their gloves when they reach the top of the world and look down at a planet that holds secrets in every layer of rock. It's documented, photographed, measured, catalogued, published in scientific journals, exhibited in museums, taught in universities, though reinterpreted to fit the dominant paradigm. The question was never whether the evidence exists. The question has always been whether we're willing to see it.